Hello, thank you. My name is Kristina Medero. My proposal project is Big Mouth as Comprehensive Sexuality Education. So a quick outline of what we're going to be discussing today is what exactly is Big Mouth. It is a Netflix series streaming currently. There's 2 seasons right now, and it focuses around the idea of puberty. So young students in middle school, and they are growing into adolescence, going through puberty, and it's also animated, so it does have a humorous component to it. So we'll discuss how sex education has developed in the U.S., how entertainment education is starting to play a role in sex education, some theoretical expectations for this project, my research questions, and finally the method I'll be using to answer those questions. So sex education in the public school system started in 1913 as the Chicago experiment. It was mostly just like a hygiene class, and then it focused as well on puberty and things like that. And then in 1964, the Sex Information and Education Council of the United States, or SIECUS, was developed, and their main job is to basically construct what comprehensive sex education needs to be in the United States. Most recently, in 2002, they've started Talk About Sex campaigns, and this has expanded outside of the public schools. You'll see them do programs with Boys Town or with local churches as well, but all of them focus around addressing adolescence and how to develop into mature adults and practice safe sex. Current trends are knowledge gaps, so trying to reach particularly minority communities. So a lot of sex education is geared toward heterosexual females. So how are we going to reach men, because they play an equal part in that conversation, as well as the LGBTQ plus community. And entertainment education is trying to fill that gap. A lot of research is focusing on how we can use media and videos to connect with adolescents to get them engaged in the information. So they're not just flipping through a textbook, but actually connecting to characters on a screen to positively change their sex behavior. So entertainment education, and specifically in the Netflix series Big Mouth, uses a variety of strategies to try and connect with their audience. This is called a parasocial relationship, in which you create kind of a faux relationship with the character. If you think of your favorite TV show, you can connect with a certain character in there and you feel like you kind of know them. And you're less likely to disagree with them. And that's where the drama comes into. So the narrative being used in here, you connect with those storylines. And you're less likely to disagree with them because you find relatability in the character. Think, I'm going to follow the advice from my friend versus listening to what my mom's going to tell me because I disagree. And with that, the show also uses a lot of humor. What's interesting is that in the research, when it comes to sex education, it's actually very good for men to watch humor. However, women tend to disagree with it. Usually their argument is it's too serious of a topic to have a humorous undertone. So that could be interesting when looking at the research. But ultimately, the humor makes it relevant. It allows us to connect to those storylines again and see, yes, I remember when I first menstruated, it was very awkward. And that leads to that social script and inclusivity, making sure that this conversation and the characters being represented in this show speak to men, women, and the LGBTQ plus community. And some theoretical expectations that I have for this, basically the SIECUS created a perfect analytical guide for me to code this series. They break down everything into 6 components: human development, relationship, personal skills, sexual behavior, sexual health, and then society and culture. Really a comprehensive lens of everything that goes into developing positive sex behavior. And with a normative theory, which is a communication theory that suggests that a media system should be structured and operated in order to conform to or realize a set of ideal social values. So ultimately, if the show is to be a viable source of sex education, it should adhere to the ideal values of the U.S. when it comes to sex education. And so my research questions are going to focus on how well the Netflix series adheres to the CICUS Ideal Comprehensive Sexuality Education. And then in order to do so, there are two sub-research questions. To what extent is the presentation inclusive, meaning including everybody, and to what extent is it relevant? How can we relate to the series and the narratives being portrayed on the show? And then overall, to what extent is the Netflix series Big Mouth a potential source for sexuality education? The method I'll be using is a content analysis. So basically breaking down those 6 components, and I will have to train a second coder. That way it's not based on my own interpretation. And the rest of the slide will actually go into how I would be training that coder as well. This creates intercoder reliability. And in order to do so, Kunkel 2003 outlined how to actually code a series like this. I would have to sit down with the coder and identify every scene in the show, and then the coders will code those scenes separately once we agree on what is considered one scene, scene 2, scene 3. Overall, using episode 1 as a training mechanism, the rest of the episodes between 2 seasons results in 516 minutes of coding material. The variables I'll be testing are my independent variables, so comprehensive sex education. First, is that information present? Second, is it inclusive? So who is that information geared towards? Men, women, or the LGBTQ plus community? And is it relevant? Is it put in a social setting that makes it relatable to the audience watching? And then the dependent variable, what I'm really testing are these big mouth scenes, do they adhere to a normative sex education? And as you can see, I pulled a few clips from here to show how interesting the show actually is. The hormone monsters are a metaphor for how puberty seems to take over our lives for a couple of years. So comprehensive knowledge, this is what the coding sheet will look like. I break down each category and provide a definition in order to train the coder. That way there is more reliability between us and we're more likely to interpret the scenes the same way. It's the same thing with social relevance. There's idea of scientific knowledge. So is the definition of that topic there? For example, from episode 1, the narrator says, the uterus is the center of the female reproductive system. That's just a fact. And then the value-based common sense knowledge, how does that information work in a social setting? We have Jessie going through her first menstruation on a class field trip, very embarrassing, and how she's handling that with her friend. And then the inclusivity, again, is it geared toward men, the LGBTQ plus community, and then the female population. This is exactly what the coding sheet will look like. The scene number will go over in this middle column. And then each time the scene adheres to that, the scene will basically earn a point. Those points will be totaled in order to analyze them using a one-way ANOVA to better analyze to the extent of which the series adheres to the ideal sex education created by the CIECUS. So overall, this study will identify if the Netflix series Big Mouth is a viable source for comprehensive sex education. With adolescents increasingly using social media and the internet to find information about their blooming sexuality, it is important for health communication scholars to look at information and series like this, even if it is in a humorous context. Thank you.
So with like the transformation with gender identities right now, has sex education classes kind of altered their way of teaching that to kind of cater to those needs and whatnot?
Yeah, so on the CIECUS website, they do have curriculum geared toward that, but each state has their own set of laws. Each city, each district decides what they're going to include in their sex education. If you remember, just I think 2 years ago, OPS went through a whole reboot. And the parents also heard that and were like, well, we don't want this included, we don't want this included, so. Yes.
What do you hope some of the implications of your findings will be?
I'm really hoping that some of the implications will be that this type of media can be used as sex education. I do imagine there will be holes in it because you can't just watch a show and fully develop your concept of who you are. I imagine that future research should look at the media effects on the individuals watching it. So maybe doing a survey analysis of people who have watched the show and what they think about it and how they've used it in conversation. Yes.
Has there been any thought given to whether a person would watch this alone or whether there would be value to watching it with a parent or sibling or a schoolmate or something that...
Yeah, that will definitely play into it. A lot of research suggests that people want to confide their sexual information with someone else. But this study is just looking at if this can be a source of information at all.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So it's part of the intention then that this series developed a level of trust with its viewers, and so then suggestion could be made to writers about topics for future series.
Yes, absolutely. So there is a guild of writers in which health communication scholars and other health professionals, they advise them to, you should include this in your content and write about it in this particular way. Yes.
So we'll be looking at maybe at some time after finding out a little more information, getting more value to the issue. Would there be youth forums or youth groups that would be put out within communities to help children feel more comfortable and easing into that conversation?
Hopefully, I would hope so. I think that having a healthy and open sex education conversation needs to happen while people find comfortability in being able to sit behind a computer and have complete autonomy and no one knows that I'm looking up this information. Being able to talk about it openly, I think is also healthy. The research also suggests, not just my opinion.
And that's why I agree. I think sometimes we have what you call like city hall meetings and community leader meetings. We forget that our children need those meetings too on their own level.
Yes.
And I think more open community groups like that for children would be a big start.
Okay, well, please join me in thanking Kristina.
Thank you.